Okay, I'm going to go ahead and get started with announcements while everybody is able to take their seats. So I appreciate you guys joining us for this 2:30 session. My name is Katie Miller. I'm the Director of Water Services for Kansas Municipal Utilities, as well as the acting chair for Kansas section of AWWA. I appreciate being the opportunity to be the moderator for this session. Really quickly, just for our panelists, by show of hands, did any of you attend the first session? Okay, because if you did, we were going to not go over those questions, but we have a new group of faces, so we will start back at the top. So a quick few housekeeping items. We're going to introduce our panelists, and then we're going to have some opening statements. We're going to follow up with those 3 questions that were introduced this morning by the hub related to opportunities, barriers, and action steps, and let each of our panelists respond to those questions. But we also have polling questions that we're going to ask you to participate in as well. So Maggie is going to pop up the instructions. So go ahead and take out your device now if you'd like to participate. We ask you to choose one of these options to be able to provide your feedback. These questions were created by our panelists, so this is information that we want to know to be able to take back to utilize for the hub. I will go ahead and preface this by saying they're very heavy toward utilities and toward local government. So I'm going to go ahead and introduce our panelists and then give them the opportunity to share a little bit more about their organizations and their opportunities within the bipartisan infrastructure law. So to my left is Jeffrey Robichaux with EPA Region 7, William Carr and Kathy Tucker-Vogel with Kansas Department of Health and Environment, Bill Perkins with the City of Wichita, Tanya Brownloway with the Environmental Finance Center at Wichita State University, Tracy Streeter with Burns McDonnell Engineering, and then finally Matt Unruh with the Kansas Water Office. So I hope you've had time to access the polling, because we're going to pop up our first question. While she is pulling that up, we are going to ask each of our panelists to tell us what their role is, and then we're going to just kind of maybe pare down those comments to just a couple of minutes each on what our organization does related to the infrastructure bill. But your first polling question, what we'd love for you to participate: if free assistance becomes available for completing the lead service line inventory requirement for your utility, will you utilize this free assistance? If you don't know what this question is, your answer is probably D. But for all the utilities, you should know what this question is because your deadline is coming. So yes, you would utilize free assistance. B, no, we will do it in-house, or we will contract that work out. C, I'm not sure, or D, does not apply to me. So while you are taking the opportunity to answer this first question, I'm going to go ahead and turn it over to Jeffrey.
Good afternoon, Jeffrey Robichaux. I am the Water Director at EPA Region 7, so I've got the 4 states of Iowa, Kansas, Missouri, and Nebraska, and both the Safe Drinking Water Act and Clean Water Act activities for all 4 of those states. With respect to bill, obviously, you guys are all familiar with it. The EPA's largest portion of that is under our Clean Water Act and Safe Drinking Water Act SRF programs, long-standing, well-run programs administered by the state, to the folks here to my left. And for the next 5 years, a sizable amount of money coming in. This fiscal year 22 upwards, or I guess past between $80 and $90 million, supporting a number of activities, and over the 5-year time frame, likely upwards or past $400 million. And the projects, typical projects that you would have funded via SRF in the past, on both the drinking water and the wastewater side, but the two big ticket items in this, separate line items for lead service line replacement, so there's quite a bit of funds. We'll hear more about on that on the lead service line. And then there's several pots of money, in fact 3, I guess 2 in SRFs and 1 in another grant program for emerging contaminants. So that we're focused on PFAS primarily, but there's other contaminants. Anything that doesn't have a drinking water regulation or a water quality criteria number for may be eligible for funding to support those types of projects. The other thing I just mentioned quickly, in addition to working with the state, hopefully EPA will have some additional resources in terms of tech assistance that'll come out of our own pot to support activities, and we'll probably be doing those largely through our finance centers across the country. You'll hear from Tanya here in a minute. So we've got some additional resources that, in addition to and supporting the state, not kind of in conflict from. We're hoping to kind of partner together on this. So that's a quick thumbnail sketch of me and EPA and Bill.
So William Carr, Assistant Director for the Bureau of Water at KDHE, and my expertise is in the SRF program, State Revolving Fund, that Jeff mentioned. Specifically for Kansas, SRF is one of those formula programs we heard about this morning, which means the grants, the federal money, federal government come to the states to existing programs, and then the municipalities apply to those existing programs for the assistance. In Kansas, the bulk of the water money is coming through SRF, about $444 million over 5 years. A significant amount of money, however, caution you really need to take a perspective on that. That's 5 years of money. So, and we only have access to 1 year at a time. The money is for, as just mentioned, aging infrastructure, lead service line replacement, towers, treatment plants, emerging contaminants. The big thing you really need to understand first is that it's not a grant program, it's a loan program. Now there are some requirements. Some of the money we get through this bill we have to give away, and we do that through loan forgiveness. But it's not like a grant program. To get that loan forgiveness, you have to take out part of a loan that you do actually pay back. Well, I'll kind of break down on the first year funding for the SRF programs. For wastewater infrastructure systems, we're getting through bill about $16 million. That's actually not a lot of money according to demand. Our current funding list right now that we have in the SRF program on wastewater is $863 million. So while the bill money is significant, it's not enough to solve the problem. We're still putting a lot of state money into this program. Wastewater emerging contaminants, $844,000. We have a project for about $530,000, so we're short about $300,000-$400,000 to use all that grant money. Third pot, drinking water infrastructure system. That's general drinking water infrastructure, about $21 million. Again, in perspective, our current funding list for those types of projects is about $360 million. So, Bill's not going to solve all those problems. There's still a significant amount of state money we're putting into that program. Fourth bucket is the drinking water lead service line replacements. That's actually the biggest bucket of bill money that's coming to us, that lead service line replacement money. We're getting about almost $33 million a year for those funds. This is the one area that actually historically no one has used the SRF program to do these types of projects before. We have a small list of people that are now interested now that we have this restricted funding for it. But that list is only about $20 million. We have $32 million in this first year of grant. So if we don't get more municipalities wanting to take advantage of that, we actually will lose that grant if we don't apply for that within the next 2 years. Fifth pot, final pot of money is for drinking water emerging contaminants. We have about $8.8 million. And again, that's for unregulated contaminants with a focus on PFAS. We actually have enough on our current funding list, about $27 million. We'll take at least the first 2 years of money to use that mainly on manganese issues. We do expect maybe some more PFAS projects in the drinking water system in the following years. But that's a short synopsis of what the SRF programs are providing through bill.
Thank you, William. Kathy?
So, good afternoon. My name is Kathy Tucker-Vogel, and I'm Chief of the Public Water Supply Section at the Kansas Department of Health and Environment. So, we oversee all of the Safe Drinking Water Act regulations, looking at compliance monitoring. There are about approximately 90-some contaminants that public water supply systems have to monitor for and be in compliance with. So, we oversee all of that. and also the operator certification program works very closely with the SRF program and Williams. So the two programs, the Safe Drinking Water Act oversight and the SRF program really go hand in hand and work together. We try to use the SRF to help water systems that are having compliance problems resolve those problems through some funding through the state revolving loan program. So I think we're trying to keep our comments short, so I'll move on to.
So I'm Bill Perkins. I am with City of Wichita in our Public Works and Utilities Department. I work with our capital improvement program. The main reason I believe I was invited to be on this panel is because of two particular projects I'm involved with. One of them being our Northwest Water Facility, a new water treatment plant, where we're using WIFIA and SRF funding. And then we also have a B&R project that is currently in 30% design phase, where we're working through the process of using WIFIA and SRF on it as well. Just to be consistent with what we did the last session, I do want to mention one thing about both those programs is that the interest rate is great. The interest rate is great, period. The other element that I think gets left out in a lot of conversations is the delay in repayment. So for instance, with WIFIA, there is a 5-year delay in starting repayment from substantial completion. And when you go into setting up your rate structure, that has a huge effect. And just because I mentioned it in the last session, I mentioned it again. So.
All right, and I'm Tanya Brownlee. I'm the director of the Environmental Finance Center at Wichita State University. And our role in this topic is as a what you call a technical assistance provider, a trainer. Our mission as an environmental finance center is just to build capacity for communities as you face and tackle environmental challenges and environmental regulations. So hopefully you've all been to one of our rates and finance trainings or asset management trainings, or have your boards and councils attend we call it CANCAP, boards and utilities training as water and wastewater managers. We do those with KMU. And so, our goal is to just help communities build their skills, build your capacity to be able to be ready to fill out these grant applications, know what you need to have set up financially, with your assets through asset management planning and CIP planning to be ready to answer these questions. What's the next infrastructure step? What do we need to do? What do our rates need to be able to pay back these loans? And so we can help you get there through training, but also through technical assistance, coming alongside of you, walking through the parts and pieces step by step. There's some funding coming down from EPA. They put out an RFA. All of the applications were due a couple weeks ago, and we're all just waiting to see who gets a lot of this technical assistance funding. There's lots of funding. There's going to be lots of opportunities for communities to be able to access technical assistance providers, whether it's us, whether it's KMU, rural water, a lot of other organizations might be funded to be able to tackle these technical assistances with you to help get your community through the SRF loan process. And we want to develop tools and resources, whether we talked last session, whether it's a video, a blog, a podcast. These things are all going to be developed and up and running over the next hopefully few months, maybe a little bit longer, as this process becomes more defined and more people do it and we know how it runs. So, thank you.
I'm Tracy Streeter. I work for Burns & McDonnell Engineering based out of Kansas City, live in Lawrence. I've been with them about 3.5 years in the water global practice. And one of my main roles is going back from my state years when I retired and went to Burns & Mac is to kind of stay engaged with the public process as it pertains to water and wastewater utilities in the municipal space. One of my tasks since COVID hit about the time I started working for Burns & Mac was to start monitoring discussions in DC relative to any sort of stimulus or rescue efforts that came out of Congress to deal with the implications of COVID. And so in 2008, when we had the financial crash, there was an ARPA Act created, which created a lot of opportunities for water infrastructure projects, and they were all kind of guised under shovel-ready conditions, looking for those types of projects to fund. So we were working on those kinds of things, and then the Rescue Act came out and brought huge sums of monies to all states, and most all of you as local municipalities received money for that. And so then the next step was just to help our clients maneuver through that and help them apply for those funds. And unfortunately, the ARPA process didn't really provide much of any support for water and wastewater. There was billions of dollars worth of needs, as anybody that followed that process knows, but water kind of came up on the short end of the stick on that through the ARPA process. But soon thereafter, here comes the bipartisan infrastructure bill, which is the topic of our conversation today. So now my focus has been helping clients do a lot of what Tanya does through the Environmental Finance Center, is to help them maneuver through these programs, understand them, and help them through the application process, and have done a fair amount of that already. So I've learned a great deal. There's certainly the EPA side of this bipartisan infrastructure bill is largely loan, as has been pointed out, with some principal forgiveness. So there is some opportunity for grants in there, but as William pointed out, the loan must come first. And there's other strings attached to SRF, and many of you have probably participated in SRF. Great program, very attractive interest rates, but there are some strings attached, and there's a new one to this particular legislation, and that's BABA, Build America, Buy America, or vice versa. What that means, it kind of piggybacks on American iron and steel requirements that it was in the current SRF, and said that all products and manufactured goods that go into a project must be American made. With supply chain issues we have right now, and the fact that materials may be scarce, it makes this really difficult to do that. In fact, it may make participating in these programs cost prohibitive. So there's some waivers that are out there right now, and EPA has one for WIFIA and a draft one for SRF. There's been comments submitted for the SRF. William has been involved in that, and people all across the country, to try to give us a little bit of reprieve from this requirement, which may make this program very attractive. So that's ongoing. We'll talk a little bit about that later. I also want to point out, we're going to focus so much on the EPA side of the bipartisan infrastructure bill, but there's still the other programs out there. USD Rural Development is still in effect, and offering loans for water and wastewater for communities under 10,000, and so those opportunities are still there as well. One of the things that I will focus on before we get out of here this afternoon is what are our needs to really make this work best for us in Kansas. And one of the things that we've identified, and Secretary Lorenz mentioned this morning, was matching funds to try to make this work better. So we'll touch on that in some subsequent questions here in a little bit. So thank you for the opportunity.
Good afternoon, everyone. I'm Matt Unruh, Assistant Director of the Kansas Water Office, and really from our Water Office agency standpoint, really our involvement with the BIL really is first and foremost with our involvement in the infrastructure hub, being a state participant in that. And really one of the things that we're looking to gain through this process is engagement with stakeholder groups across the state to help position the individual entities, organizations, whatnot, as well as the state as a whole, to best take advantage of these BIL resources. So one of the things that we will hear about over the course of the discussion is some of these resources that are available, and in addition to those that have already been touched on, I might just mention in relation to Bureau of Reclamation funding, whether it's through WaterSmart or their Title 16 funding, there are resources out there and available that provide these opportunities for infrastructure type support when it comes to water reuse, any sort of smart metering or irrigation technology related considerations, water conservation and efficiency related projects, as well as small and large water supply storage related projects. So these BIL funds coming through the Bureau of Reclamation, I believe it's in the $8.3 billion ballpark, and roughly 2/3 of those funds are competitive in nature. So there's an application process to get be in place. So Kansas could be well positioned to take advantage of these resources if we can work to identify what we best need to be doing from a state standpoint through the hub, and working with stakeholders such as yourselves to position ourselves to basically apply for the resources, hopefully get the award for the resources, and then work to collectively put those resources to the ground. And from a state standpoint too, one of the things that we look at from a water office standpoint are some of our larger scale water resource issues, whether that's surface or groundwater issues, quantity or quality. Resources through BIL provide the opportunity for the state to really make a positive impact on both our surface and groundwater resources from a quality and quantity standpoint. So positioning ourselves from a state standpoint to be in a solid water supply standpoint into the future is something that could be realized from these resources. And panelists such as myself and others, as well as stakeholders, we all look forward to engaging in this discussion and helping us best take advantage of the resources that are available.
Excellent. Thank you, Matt and other panelists. Maggie, if you don't mind, let's go ahead and pop up that second polling question. For those of you who may have stepped in a bit late, we have interactive polling that we would encourage you to do, especially if you represent a utility. That's how most of these questions are flavored. You can respond at pollev.com/KDOT, and I think it magically appears. But we would love for you to participate in these 6 polling questions. This is question number 2. Is regionalization a viable opportunity for your utility? And keep in mind, regionalization doesn't just have to mean physical pipe interconnects. It can mean sharing of resources, sharing of operations, management type functions and activities. So A, yes, B, no, C, not sure, and D, does not apply to me. So we'll encourage you to continue to participate in those. This data is being collected from both sessions, and we will be feeding this back to the hub after this session. So we're going to move on to our questions that were posed by the hub this morning related to opportunities, barriers, and actions. So I'm going to start again with Jeffrey with EPA. The question will be the same for all of our panelists. What opportunities do you see within the sector that will offer the most improvements?
Yeah, I'll just hit one this time, and it was the first one I mentioned previously. The administration is very much focused on equity and making sure that these resources are making their way across our landscape. And so the focus on small and disadvantaged communities, both across the rural landscape and then in neighborhoods in larger communities that have disadvantaged populations as well. So being able to focus those resources and not an insubstantial amount of additional subsidization. In Kansas, it's going to be via principal loan forgiveness, but that will really help out in terms of affordability for a lot of communities that without that wouldn't be able to make the investments that they need. So that's focus on small disadvantaged and rural communities.
So I want to talk about opportunities. Through SRF funding, we have these kind of restricted buckets, and one of the buckets is for emerging contaminants. Actually, there's 2 buckets: drinking water and wastewater system. It's a real opportunity, just kind of in the sense of, as a regulatory agency, it's kind of something you don't think of. These are for projects that do not have regulations. These are things that the state's not forcing you to do, but these are contaminants that are out there. There might be regulations for them in the future, but it's kind of forward thinking. It's an opportunity to take care of a problem before the government says you have to take care of this problem. So it's sort of can be a wide range of things. Manganese is pretty prevalent, I think, in this first round of funding. But think about toxins from algal blooms, or for PFAS, which is really the focus from the federal government. So I think that's a real opportunity for utilities to look at those contaminants and use this funding to address them.
So I think the primary opportunity here with the bill money and with the new lead and copper rule revision that was just promulgated by EPA last year, we have an opportunity to make some real advancements in public health protection with the removal of lead from our distribution systems. So lead is a neurotoxin. There is no safe level of lead, and it has great impact on infants and children especially. So the bill money provides us an opportunity to get the lead out, essentially. So I look forward to that. One of the things that water systems are required to do under the lead and copper rule revision is inventory all of your service lines, both on the public water supply system owned side and on the privately owned customer side, so up to the foundation. The service lines must be inventoried. And once we identify all the lead that's in your service lines, then we can go to the SRF, the bill money, and use the loan program then to remove all those lead service lines. So I think this is a great opportunity to make some real advancements in public health protection.
So one of the opportunities I see with BIL and all this funding possibilities being focused on the water and sewer industry, water and sewer sector, is being able to catch up some of that deferred maintenance, some of those aging assets, those things that are the emergencies that keep us from doing other things like proper asset management. Being able to get to a point where we're not always working on the fires and we're actually able to take care of our assets and in water and sewer organizations in general. Being able to do the proper preventative maintenance, do causal analysis when you have a problem, being able to do rehabilitation to extend the asset life and not always be focused on those fires, on those things that are completely falling apart. I think that's a big opportunity to use this funding.
I think another opportunity for this funding for our communities, so, there's money available. Let's kind of dream big. What is your community going to look like in the future? Taking a little bit of time, because I think Tracy's going to say, we don't have a lot of time. We got to get this money spent. But taking a little time at the beginning to really think about what's our community going to, like, what do we anticipate our community is going to look like in the next generation, How do we use this money to prepare for that future? Do that visioneering, do that analysis, forward thinking, so that we can right size our projects to set our future generations up for success and for having affordable rates and a system that works well with all of these parts and pieces in place, where they don't have to just be catching up with all the fires and not being able to just do the ongoing maintenance as needed and just function in that proactive way instead of a reactive way.
So these folks have touched on the build money through the SRF programs. I'm going to focus on what Matt mentioned in his opening comments, and that's the Bureau of Reclamation money. Secretary Lorenz said this morning that 40% of this funding overall is competitive, that's out there to be gotten by Kansas, and she's competitive, wants to get as much as possible, and I totally concur in that. The Bureau of Reclamation is maybe that place when you look at the water component of this. There may be some other smaller opportunities, but the bulk of it is there. These programs are only operated in 17 states from Kansas west, and they deal primarily in water reuse, recycling, aquifer storage, recovery. They have some new programs that focus on storage and conveyance. So I think there's a number of programs there that we need to take a hard look at here in Kansas to make sure if those types of projects fit what your community needs, that we get you the resources to apply for those funds. So I think that's our biggest opportunity on top of what these folks have already said.
Now, I appreciate the comments Bill and Tanya would have made, because really, if you're looking at the opportunities that could be realized from BIL, looking at it from both a local level, a regional level, and a state level, the opportunity to increase our overall water reliability and resiliency, support for social and economic equity, and some of the considerations that are included within BIL funding to help with some of those equity-related issues. The opportunity as far as catching up on deferred maintenance, like Bill mentioned, provides the opportunity for modernization and upgrades to current infrastructure. So the benefits that can be realized there at the local, regional, or state level. And then just an overall enhanced opportunity for enhanced water conservation, climate resiliency when it comes to periods of flood and drought. These resources provide the opportunity to improve our overall resiliency from a local, regional, and state level for climate resiliency related considerations, as well as ecosystem related efforts too. A lot of these efforts, if you're dealing with water quantity or quality related considerations, there would be ecosystem benefits to be realized from this work as well. So those would be some of the areas or opportunities that exist if we're able to fully take advantage of the resources and the window of opportunity that we have. So those would be, I guess, some of my opportunities I see.
Thank you, panelists. I do want to mention to those attending virtually, we see you. Welcome. We appreciate you being here, and we encourage you to go ahead and continue to submit your questions. We are going to hold your questions. I know we've received one until we get to receiving the questions from the rest of the audience. We're going to go ahead and move on to our third poll, I believe related to regionalization again. So your main barrier to regionalization in your utility is A, geography, B, local politics, C, funding, or D, does not apply to me. And again, and we would also hope that those online are also participating in these polls as well, pollev.com/KDOT. So on to our next question related to barriers for our panelists. What are the barriers that may prevent communities from maximizing these opportunities?
I'm going to bring up one that I heard this morning. I hadn't really thought of communication. I mean, the ability, those of you who are here, obviously you're hearing about Bill, you're hearing about the opportunities, but you know, all of us at the table here need to be able to communicate in a lot of different ways because folks around the state consume information differently. Who are we getting it to? How are we getting it to them? And so making sure that we're able to hit everybody at the time that they need it and the level of information that they need to consume it, because kind of a one-size-fits-all on this probably isn't going to get us to 100% dissemination. So communication, I think, is going to be a big barrier.
So the barrier I want to talk about is really the lack of information about the need for a project. Again, going to like emerging contaminants and PFAS. The fact that a lot of utilities don't know if there's PFAS detected in the waters. A lot of even the sewer systems don't know if there's PFAS being discharged. That type of information, you really not having that's preventing you from being able to apply for these funds. You don't know if you have that problem. In a general sense, you know, I'd also encourage, you know, for any SRF loan, except for lead service line inventories, for any other loan, you're going to need a preliminary engineering report as part of the application process. So, you know, you might know in your utility you have a problem, but if you haven't done that preliminary research and had an engineer look at the problem and make suggestions how to resolve it, that's going to be a barrier. You're not going to be able to complete the loan application process unless you have that basic need information.
So I think there are a couple of barriers I'd like to mention. The first one is the capacity of small utilities to be able to get through the loan process, you know, know how to hire a qualified engineer, going through the process to your RFP to find an engineer, going through the loan application process, making sure you have all the documents in place to get your loan application completed in a timely manner. A lot of small communities just don't have the capacity to do that. They don't have the technical staff on board to help with that. And likewise, at the state level, you know, we have to review all of the plans and specifications for your projects before you can proceed with them. And like we've heard several times today, the ability to hire engineers, to find engineers, we're all struggling with that, which slows down the project review time at KDHE, which slows down and creates a barrier for all of you if if you have to wait longer to get your project approval so you can proceed. So, we're trying to find ways to address that, but, it's a fundamental staffing problem that we're all experiencing. But I do think that's a barrier to getting some of these projects moving forward as quickly as we would like.
So I'm gonna stick with the same one I said in the earlier session, and again, it goes back to people and staffing. So those same engineers that KDHE is competing for are what the engineering firms are competing for, City of Wichita is competing for. We're all going for the same engineers, and too bad they can't work all three areas. But getting engineers, getting people involved in the water and sewer sector, not just engineers, all levels, everything from construction to plant operators to everything. Staffing is a big issue, and it definitely could end up being a barrier to a lot of different possibilities and opportunities that are out there. But engineers are definitely a big one, and getting out and getting young people involved, getting young people aware of what the opportunities are.
So we're talked about engineers and that side being a barrier, but I also think on the financial and the financial analysis side might be a barrier as well. Like, we have these ideas in plans for infrastructure, but have we done the financial assessments to determine, are we able to fund this and pay back these loans that we've worked so hard to develop and get? And so having tools and resources and the technical assistance from TA providers and other folks, I think, especially, bigger communities a lot of times have that in-house, but smaller communities may not have that assistance. And then also along that, just talking with the local elected officials to get them on board and all moving in the same direction as you think about your finances and finances for the future, because, repaying a big infrastructure loan might require some rate increases or things like that, and that's not always a fun conversation to have, and a lot of political capital is at stake, and so that's often difficult for those decision makers that are elected in our communities, but have big responsibilities for the future of this type of work. So I think those are barriers, but I don't think they're overcomable, just something to put in good hard work with.
So I mentioned the Bureau of Reclamation programs as maybe our competitive opportunity to secure more money in Kansas. I think one of the barriers to using those programs is, one, the cost share rates for those particular programs seem to be pretty low, 25% on the low end, and maybe 50 is the best you can get. So I think that can be an issue, and we'll talk about how to address that. Would be, obviously some matching funds or some other ways of financing that can fill that gap. The other barrier I mentioned in my opening comments is Build America, Buy America. I think that's something that's going to impact us here in the short run. And we're on a 5-year clock to get these funds committed. So it's going to be critical that we seek some waivers, at least here in the early stages of the implementation of this legislation, so that projects that are underway maybe can be exempt from Build America, Buy America, because maybe they've already put out RFPs for pricing for materials and whatnot, and it could be a deal breaker. I know for firsthand that there's some folks out there that have applied for some of these funding opportunities, but the waiver doesn't come through. They're probably not going to take advantage of the grant because it's going to be more expensive to comply than it is to take the money. So the difference is not worth it. So we're gonna see some. If the waivers don't go our way, they'll walk away from the opportunity. So that will occur. The other thing that I think is we focus on the biggest bucket that William referred to, the lead service line replacement program, which is ultimately where we want to get. The first thing to do is the inventories, as has been pointed out. There's a lot of ideas and a lot of ways of going about figuring out how to identify what you have in terms of lead service lines. So I think anything we can do to provide water utilities with some workshops or technology sharing on what's out there to get this job done would be very helpful to help you make a decision on how to proceed. As a consultant, I can tell you that we have our widget the way we would like to do it, and I know there's probably dozens of others, and they probably are all have pros and cons to them, but as a utility, I know having confidence in the right solution is important. So I think that would be helpful.
Jeff, I appreciate you bringing up the communications related barrier earlier, and I feel like from some of the discussion that took place even during our last panel discussion, that was something that resonated from there too. From a communication standpoint, recognizing the value of ensuring that appropriate contacts or proper contacts are in place. And there's some element of strategic communications, being able to provide information that's of most relevance or most importance to help individuals filter through all of the masses of emails that come. I know at least in my email box, doing that quick filter and trying to find that information that is of most importance, that's a daily barrier for me. So being able to package information when it comes to some of these resources that are available to best resonate with you all on the receiving end, to know where you need to focus your efforts and attention as far as information transfer. That's a barrier, but something for us to be working towards a resolution towards. So that would be one that I would hope that collectively with hub members that we would look to, at least from a state and hub member standpoint, work to try to address that. Another thing too that sort of ties into that communication strategy piece too would be just making you all aware of all of the various BIL resources that are available. So whether that's a toolkit type mindset or whatnot, being able to have sort of those resources that are available or directions to be able to point you, and not knowing from an individual standpoint where to start those efforts, that could be a potential barrier. But again, an opportunity collectively with panel members and others that are involved in the session over the next couple days to work to identify ways that we can, I guess, best package some of this resource-related information to be of most value to those of you that would be working through the application process for these. So again, potential barriers, but barriers that I think there could be collective solutions to address based off of hearing from you all what some of your biggest issues or needs might be.
Thank you, Matt and all. Let's go on to the next polling question. Do you plan to utilize SRF funds for addressing lead service lines or PFAS in your community? A is yes, B is no, C is not sure, and D does not apply to me. We're going to move on into the final question posed by the hub, which is the actions piece. I'm going to ask my panelists to keep this very brief, Tracy, and just give us your action and maybe a quick definition. Kidding. We appreciate all comments. What actions might be the most helpful to capture opportunities and remove barriers, particularly for your communities?
So quickly, a lot of money, a lot of projects, not a lot of time, not enough people to do it. You all kind of see that it's going to be challenging here. Creative ideas. We talked a little bit about this. We're going to have to do things differently, find other alternatives, be more flexible in places, and engage others. One idea we've bandied about at EPA, engaging our university engineering programs quite a bit more to see if we can utilize them, while they're in school. Obviously, they can't do design build stuff, but potentially get out there, get some on-the-job training, whether it's kind of like a geologist field camp type thing for engineers, but to support some of the technical assistance providers. And are there things like that we could marshal to fill in a lot of the gaps? So just being creative solutions, and I think that's a lot of what tomorrow is going to be.
So one of the actions I want to talk about, it's really kind of philosophical, I guess, in a sense. I deal a lot with small communities, and the problem we find there is that we really need an advocate, a champion for the project, for the cause. Someone within the local government, the governing body or staff of the governing body, that is really motivated to understand, we have a problem, understand, the solutions that are being presented, to understand, how to get through this application processes. Now, there'll be opportunities. You can go out and hire consultants to help you with engineering, hire consultants and technical assistance providers to get you through application processes and, hold your hand and make sure you're going in the right direction. but those entities can't make the decisions for you. You really need someone at the local level that is really engaged with the process and is willing to try to figure these things out. So I think that's really the first action that needs to be taken is with these small communities, you really need to find someone on local level to become that champion.
So kind of to tag along with having the local champion, also don't be afraid to call us, to call KDHE with questions, concerns, even if I like to think outside the box whenever we can. Sometimes William reels me back in and says, no, you can't spend the money that way. But I'm always willing to have the conversation if you have an idea or a thought that you would like to discuss with us for a project. I think that that's something that we always want to hear from you about. So that open communication, both directions. We need to make sure that we're communicating with all of you about the assistance that's out there. And we want all of you to know that we're available to answer questions, to help work through your project planning as we go along. And, EPA can't be successful without the state with these programs. They give us the money. It's up to us to implement the SRF program, and we can't be successful at the state level without all of you and without the technical assistance providers and the consulting engineers. So it takes a collective effort on the part of all of the water sector, the water community. And so I think, kind of going back to what Jeff said earlier with his opening remarks, communications and keeping those lines of communication open in both directions is critically important for all of us to be successful.
Thank you.
It's a little bit different answer than I gave in the earlier session, but something that came up towards the end of that last session was about having the staff to do a lot of the work related to these funding sources, so the reporting and the different things that are required. And I guess I wanted to make sure that everybody understood that can be part of your funding. Yeah, it's not free. You're hiring another consultant, but City of Wichita, we don't have unlimited resources either. We've hired an owner's advisor as part of our Northwest Water Treatment Project, and we have an owner's advisor with our BNR project, and they take care of a lot of that work. We don't have staff. We don't have staff dedicated to the project 100% of the time. We're using these owners advisors and others. It avoids the fact of creating a position for a project and then not knowing what to do with that person when the project's done. It gives us more resources on staff. It gives us more varied resources. So when we hire an owner's advisor, we don't get just one person with that one person's experience. We get a firm that has a lot of varied experience across the different areas of the project. So I guess I just wanted to make sure that everybody understood that is part of your engineering costs in the project, and you're going to pay that cost one way or the other, whether you have the staff or if you're paying them to have the staff. And to have that expertise is very important.
All right, and I think just what I've heard over the past couple of sessions and just in talking about this for a number of months now, I think the most important opportunity or thing we can do that will open up these opportunities is talk and communicate and share. And that's at your local level as you're thinking about what you're planning to do. It's the local level with like the TA providers and the state, and then hopefully across the state through this hub organization, and even hopefully at the federal level, everyone is talking and communicating. The more we can get everybody sharing what's going on, what the opportunities are, how we can meld things together, like we were talking about in the last session. Like, we're going to dig up this road to use transportation funds to make the road better. Well, let's do the water service lines or, sewer project or whatever else we can do. Let's do this all at the same time. So how do we maximize that process by getting those funds kind of dovetailed together on the same timeline and all of that. So I think just the more you can talk about, the more folks you can bring to the table, I think is going to be the key to making all of this work.
I don't believe I have any further comment.
We're supposed to run ahead of schedule.
I do have one comment. In my experience here with Burns and McDonald, I've discovered that a lot of our clients are financing this largely on their ratepayers' backs, like all water utilities do. But there's some uniqueness to what we're doing right now with with this infrastructure legislation that I think leads us into maybe looking at some broader partnerships at the local level. And you've heard the term P3 used, and I never really knew, how to apply that until I've seen it done in a couple of areas. So I think in a lot of times our need for utility infrastructure changes as a result of growth. A new industry comes to town, and you're trying to accommodate that. And so that brings the opportunity to have that industry partner with you on the infrastructure. And I think that, again, fills the gap. I keep harping on need for more matching funds, but there's other things you can do locally, and that's get your private partners involved with the three-legged government stool of local, state, and federal.
Yeah, I don't really have a whole lot else to add beyond what the panelists have mentioned. I think as far as the actions to overcome, they have encapsulated things beautifully. The only thing that I would maybe mention to add in addition to all this is that realize sort of bringing it back to the core question here of what are some of the actions that we could be looking at to overcome some of these barriers. I would just mention that from the panelists here today, as well as any of us that are involved with the infrastructure hub, please know and realize that we do take your input and feedback seriously. We are relying on the input that you all provide today and over the course of today and tomorrow to identify what these barriers are, and there will be effort to identify and take that feedback that is provided over the course of this session and the rest of this summit and on into the future to work to reduce or remove those barriers where we can from a prioritization standpoint. So please know that the input that you provide us and elsewhere over the course of these 2 days really does help to identify where those barriers are and how we can start to formulate the game plan to remove or overcome those barriers. So this opportunity really is there for that stakeholder input, the communication piece that we've talked about that's resonated in so many of our comments up here. The communication lines going both ways. Hearing that input from you all provides us the framework that we need to start to work to overcome the barriers that could exist for you.
Thank you, panelists. So our fifth polling question, what are the barriers in applying for SRF funds within your utility? A, we don't understand the process. B, personnel to manage application reporting. C, we choose to utilize other funding. Or D, it does not apply to me. I'm going to go ahead and open it to the floor. Is there anyone that has a question? If so, I would ask you to come up to the mic, identify yourself, and ask your question. And while you are all fighting to get in line to do so, I'm going to go ahead and ask one of the questions that have been posed by someone virtually. William, this question would go to you. And this is quoted, so for drinking water state revolving funds, under the bipartisan infrastructure law, 49% of funds shall be eligible to be grants or 100% principal forgiveness loans. How has Kansas determined how this will be applied?
So few details to point out. It's 49% of the grant amount that we get from EPA in the general supplemental pot. It's 49%, and the lead service line, it's 49%. Also, a requirement of the law is that 49% of loan forgiveness can only go to disadvantaged communities on drinking water side or communities that meet the affordability criteria on the sewer side, clean water side. On the clean water side, we haven't made any changes to our affordability criteria. It's the same it's been for the last couple of years. It's based on unemployment rates, population, whether the project's in a federal opportunity zone, and there's a fourth one that I'm forgetting at this moment. But those haven't changed. And mainly because we already had enough demand, that extra, that 49% of that smaller grant amount, our current demand already chewed that up. So we didn't need to expand our criteria to use the money. On the drinking water side, we did have to expand the criteria a little bit. And what we did is we based affordability criteria on poverty rates. So if your municipality has a poverty rate that is at or greater than the statewide poverty rate, we consider that community a disadvantaged community, or that municipality a disadvantaged community, and they're eligible for the loan forgiveness provided by bill. There's also, for those municipalities that don't qualify that way, we also have, it really only works for lead service lines or distribution system replacements. But if you can define a project area in a larger municipality, and the census tract data of that project area shows the poverty rates are at or above the state rates, then we would consider that project area a disadvantaged community, and that qualifies for loan forgiveness. The third criteria on the drinking water side is based solely on population. If your municipality serves a population of 150 or less, we consider that a disadvantaged community. That's a small enough community, you have no economy of scale, you really can't afford to pay back a loan at really any cost. So those are the three ways we've expanded to qualify for loan forgiveness.
Thank you, William. Let's come on with our next polling question, and go ahead and keep the floor open for questions. How can technical assistance providers help you in applying for SRF funds? A, providing general information and training. B, project design assistance. C, financial or CIP assessments or assistance. D, helping complete forms and application materials, or E, does not apply to me. I'm going to go on with another question that we received from Laura Gray online. And Kathy or William, I think would be appropriate. Does Kansas have grant funds for preliminary engineering report assistance?
Yes. Yes, we do. There are categories. So if it is a utility that is having a compliance problem, so we will provide planning grant assistance for that. We provide planning grants for regional projects. And I believe there's a new project coming out with CDBG that we will partner with Department of Commerce with their regional public water supply planning grants. It looks like they have a 50% cost share. Our planning grant requires a 50% cost share. So 50 and 50 equals 100. So that would mean that there's potential out there for 100% grant for regional planning. So I think that's just new, hot off the press. So I hope if anybody from Commerce is here, I didn't steal your thunder. I'm sorry. So we look forward to working with water systems on that. And the other one that I think will be helpful moving forward with implementation of the lead and copper rule revision, we've had this on the books for a while. We haven't had anybody take advantage of it, is planning grants for corrosion control studies for compliance with the lead and copper rule. So if under the rule you've triggered a required corrosion control study, we have 50% grant that will allow you to hire an engineer to do the corrosion control study. So those are the three grant opportunities that we have.
Thank you, Kathy. All right, Maggie, do we have one more question? If a physical interconnection due to geography is not feasible for your utility, would you be interested in any of the following partnership approaches? So going back to the regionalization question, A, shared operators, B, shared management, C, not sure, or D, does not apply to me. So I apologize for rushing through, panelists. I was being texted and asking us to wrap it up early to give people time to get back into the other session. So I do encourage you to stay around. I would venture to say our panelists might hang around for a couple minutes and answer any questions that you might have. Otherwise, I'm going to go ahead and release the group and say thank you very much for one more question really quickly before you get released, please. Dan, can you, for the mic, well, we have folks online. I appreciate you. And if you don't mind, identify yourself. Thank you.
Hello, my name is Dan Ryan with the City of Ottawa. First off, a lot of these funds are going to have, because some grants that we have currently have some pretty rigid schedules in them. Some of those scheduling events are going to be hard to meet by some of the things that we've talked about here today. There aren't enough people. I mean, there's a lot of things sitting in KDHE's office waiting for review or waiting on permits. You don't have the personnel. I understand that. Where does that, is some lenience or some, can one expect some, is there a process to ask for that?
So deadline, what kind of deadlines are you talking about that you have to meet, I guess?
Well, for one thing, we're really up against bidding some projects because we're waiting on review and those
Okay,
kinds
so
of
it's more,
things.
so that might be more of a your question than kick that to you.
Well done, Kathy.
Not sure that's
Bill, would you
true,
like to
but-
defer that to Jeff?
So you're talking about a regular project. It's in for KDHE review. And we haven't completed the review and approved it, so you're not bidding the project yet. Is there some leniency on that? If it's not an SRF project, there is some risk involved, but
Yeah.
yes, the city could go ahead and bid it. Now, the city
Oh,
may
yeah, I
not
get
start
that.
construction until KDHE has completed the review. And if that review means you have to change some of the contract, you're going to have to do that by change order. So some leniency in that way. For a SRF project, not so much. There's enough kind of non-technical stuff that we have to make sure is in that, in the plans and specs, that even bidding without us doing that review could have some very dire consequences. So there's not a lot of flexibility on the SRF side if it's a SRF funded project.
And the other question, deadline wise, the formal guidance for lead copper inventory is,
So we
but the
are
deadline is
waiting.
not changing.
The deadline is not changing for when they have to be submitted. That's still October 16, 2024. We are still waiting on the guidance from EPA headquarters. I'm going to
Another good deferral, Kathy.
To take the pain there, I don't expect any of the deadlines to change, and the guidance is working its way through. Hopefully, it will. I don't want to tell you the date, but summertime would be really nice. Here with OMB,
Any particular summer?
Yeah, that's a great question. What I can
There's one
say
every year.
is the work that Kansas has been doing and the kind of their focus on approaches. It's not pre-approved or anything, but it looks very consistent with what we'd see. So if people are doing work with what Kansas has laid out, you'll be in good shape when the guidance.
I think most of us are moving forward with it, but kind of doing the low-hanging fruit portions.
So the guidance that we've posted on our website, so the spreadsheet, the inventory
Yep.
spreadsheet, and the guidance that goes along with that, we don't anticipate that there are going to be dramatic changes to that. So I would say you're safe in moving ahead. There could be some tweaks based on guidance we get back, but we've been engaged now in Kansas staff have been engaged for several years now with EPA on this process. So we're pretty confident that what we've got is going to look a lot like what the final product is We just, I'm not going to say this is official, this is it, till we see the guidance.
Well, and for our community, we're moving forward with what you've put out, and
Right.
and it's good. I
Right.
would congratulate the spreadsheet, and it's good stuff.
Well, thank you. I will give credit to Rob Gavin. He worked very hard on that.
All right. Thank you.
Thank you, Dan. Thank you, Kathy. If you guys would join me in thanking our panelists for their time today. Appreciate that. So we will ask the group to move back to the auditorium where our opening session was this morning for the wrap-up. Thank you.